welcome to MindMatters Masterclass in this month of September in conjunction with the International Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And so, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our VIP Masterclass speaker, Rob Newberry. He is an international school educator. He's got his master's in counseling and he's passionate about counseling and helping people become better. He's also a registered, accredited safeTALK trainer. It's a suicide prevention training course and recognized globally. And so, guys, can you please help me welcome Mr. Rob Newberry?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me to come and speak tonight. I think I was really honored to be asked to come and speak. Just a little bit of background of how I kind of got involved in this. I'm the Dean of Students at an international school here in Singapore. And as part of that role of Dean of Students, I'm the designated safeguarding lead as well. So that involves all aspects of safeguarding for children, including students that might be at risk. And so the school has been very generous over the years in giving me a lot of training. They've sent me on training for Assist, safeTALK, and to be a safeTALK trainer. I'm really just kind of sharing the learning that I've done. I don't consider myself an expert in this kind of thing, but I do definitely have a lot of things to say about it, and I can share what I do know about it, and maybe we can have a great conversation through your questions later on. Just before we start, I think it's really important that you look after yourself. All of us have been touched in some capacity by suicide, whether it's somebody very close to us, maybe somebody in our family, maybe a colleague, maybe a friend. If this is something you feel very strongly about and you start having some triggers or you start feeling a bit concerned about this, don't be afraid to just turn off your camera. If you have to step away from the screen, if you have to close the call, that's totally fine. But also know how to get some help if you feel that this is something that you need to speak to somebody immediately because of something you've heard or something that you're experiencing during this talk at any time. Okay, so please look after yourself. That's really important. So our agenda is I'll go through a few things. I'm going to be talking about some myths about suicide, also talking about some statistics of suicide in Singapore and around the world. What are some of the things that we look for with those people that are at risk? And then something that's really taken from the Living Work safeTALK. Then we're going to be looking at things like invitations, which is something very, very interesting. And I think that's probably one of the most interesting and helpful aspects of suicide prevention. I'll also give you a very rudimentary way that you can maybe strategize on how to offer an intervention to somebody. And then we'll take some questions and answers at the end. I hope that's okay. The first thing I think we want to talk about is make sure that we're using the right language when we talk about suicide. A lot of people from my generation and maybe older will be used to saying things like commit suicide. And that's an old kind of language. We don't use that language anymore when we're talking about suicide because committing is related to a crime. And suicide is not a crime. And I'll talk about that later on about what happened in Singapore in 2020. So we don't say commit suicide. We say a person suicided, or we wouldn't say a successful suicide. We would say completed suicide or died by suicide. So it's really important that we use the correct language just to make sure that we're being inclusive as possible. Okay. So starting off, we'll talk about some myths, and I have 4 that I think are very important when we're talking about the subject of suicide. The first one is one that a lot of people, and I think I read an article recently in Singapore that said that 8 out of 10 people think that by talking about suicide, it's going to increase the risk of it happening. And so, yeah, talking about suicide increases the risk of it happening. That is a myth, and it's actually just not true. Human beings are really not that easy to influence. And it's quite unlikely that people who are suffering from mental health crisis or who have depression or might just be going up down about themselves, it's unlikely that they wouldn't know about suicide. Naming it is not going to make it any more appealing. And by asking about suicide and asking somebody if they're considering suicide, you're letting them know that you're actually a thoughtful person, that you notice things, and that you're taking it seriously. And it signals to them that you're actually there to help. So that's a myth that we definitely have to get out of the way first. The second one is people who are suicidal want to die. That is an interesting one because if you think about our survival instincts, we all want to survive. Everything about us, when we touch a hot stove, our hand pulls back. We recoil from pain. We recoil from suffering. That's a natural action that's sort of ingrained in our DNA. So people that are considering suicide actually reach out because they don't want to die, or at least a big part of them doesn't want to. And this is almost always the case. And I think it's really important that I highlighted this, that right up to and including the time of dying, there's some doubt that remains. I think it's really important to remember that life is strong. People want to survive and they want to live. And so the part that wants to live, it works really hard to find a way to let other people know that there is a threat to life. And we have to be respectful of that. And remember that there is a part of this person that definitely wants to live. The next one is that only certain people have thoughts of suicide. This is another myth, and it's the answer for that is kind of sort of, because there definitely are some categories of people, and people who are suffering from mental health is a huge one. Mental health concerns. We'll look at that later on. Yes, there are certain demographics that are more at risk of suicide, but if we focus on that and we actually say that that's our measurement to determine who is at risk of suicide, we're going to miss a lot of people as well. And we're going to falsely identify people. We say, okay, well, you're suffering from mental health concerns. Well, you must be at risk of suicide. Well, that's not necessarily the case. So we really want to pay attention to what the invitations are. And I'll talk about that a bit later on. And the last myth is that suicide often occurs without warning. There are some suicides that happen very quickly, and the time from the thinking about suicide until the time where they actually suicide is actually very short. But the majority of these cases are not actually as impulsive as we think, especially once we get to know what's really going on and we're more tuned into these invitations that I was talking about. I put a little star there because a very good friend of mine 2 nights ago asked me, she said, is it true that people who are thinking about suicide or serious about it don't talk about it? And I think that that's a way of thinking about it, but I would hope that in the not talking about it, that itself is a bit of an invitation. And I think once we get better at looking at invitations, we'll realize that when we look back at this person or think about their behaviors, there was a lot that they were actually communicating, whether it was verbal or not. So we'll take a look at that as well. Moving on to statistics of suicide, I won't spend a lot of time here, but I think it's important that we understand what are we really talking about and how big of a concern this is. So worldwide, around 720,000 people die of suicide every year. These statistics are taken from the World Health Organization in March earlier this year. Suicide is the third leading cause of death between 15 and 29-year-olds. And 73% of global suicides occur in low and middle income countries. This is not just something that occurs in high income countries. The reasons for suicide are multifaceted, and there are lots of factors that are social, cultural, biological, psychological, environmental, and they present across a person's life course. And it's really important to remember that for every suicide, there are many more people who have actually attempted suicide, and a prior suicide attempt is a very important risk factor. I think the statistics were in 2002 or 2007. They were estimating that between 10 and 20 million people a year attempted suicide. And I'm sure that number is actually quite a lot higher now. So there's a lot going on. In Singapore, we can focus a little bit closer to home here. This is the latest statistics that came out in July earlier this year, and there were 314 suicides reported in Singapore. And there was a huge increase that we've seen in the age between 30 and 39. Now, this number has to be taken with a bit of a grain of salt because if anybody remembers, the suicide number that was released in Singapore in 2023 was originally 322. And just earlier this year, just a few months ago, they revised that number to 434 based on better data. So the 314 number that has just been released, they make it very clear that the Samaritans of Singapore have said this is a provisional number, and that number might go up. We hope it won't go up very much. It would be great if it actually went down. But if we're following the same metrics, and if we can assume that the same percentage from 2023 applies to 2024, the number could be over 400. But let's just wait and see, and hopefully that number doesn't go up. If it does, hopefully it doesn't go up very much. This kind of data can be confusing to look at, so I won't go too far into it, and I won't expect you to decipher this, but I will highlight 3 things I want you to pay attention to. The first 2 are the circles at the bottom. That's the ages between 20 and 29. And 60 and 69. Those are very high rates of suicide. And if you look at the arrow, that indicates the increase that's happened between 30 and 39-year-olds. So there is an increase. And again, if the numbers do go up higher, then we're going to see that number also increase. So I think that when we're thinking about this as a problem and a concern that we want to address, we want to make sure that we're addressing these young people between 10 and 29. Again, that's one of the highest rates. The 30 to 39-year-old is in there as well. And then we have the 60 to 69-year-olds who are also in this risk category. It's not like me usually to insert my own opinion here, but I will take the liberty and just kind of make a suggestion here. Me personally, I think that rates of suicide are increased in this age I think part of it is because of COVID, but I don't want to blame it too much. I think personally that some of this is related to this lack of meaning and purpose in people's lives. And we can get into that at some point when we're talking about things like our disconnection from each other, when we're talking about our use of technology, mobile phones. I'm not blaming it on technology, but I do think that this question of purpose actually plays a bigger role than we're really aware of. And I pulled this article as well that was July earlier this year, that Singapore does track suicide deaths very carefully. But what this article is basically talking about is that we need a lot more information when we're talking about distress and trends. We need to know why people are doing this. We need to understand what are the reasons behind this. Because I think if we can get a better understanding of what people are going through, then prevention becomes much, much easier. Um, some statistics here, I'm going to show you two sets of statistics. This first one is from IMH. This was September in 2021. Ages between 10 and 29 is the leading cause of death in Singapore. 1 in 13 adults had actually considered suicide, which we call suicidal ideation. And that's almost 243,000 people. That's every year. Suicidal ideation was 1.4 times higher in females and 3.6 times more likely in youth between 18 and 34 compared to people who are 65. Now, if we compare this data to the Samaritans data from July 2025, there's not too much difference. Again, there's that 314 deaths by suicide with a little star there because that number is provisional. 64.3% are male. So while we might have, if we go back and say that the 1.4 times in ideation is higher in females, what we find is that males who die by suicide are much higher. And the largest increase again between the ages of 30 and 39. The Samaritans summarized the problem just in the article by saying that family problems, job stability, and mental health challenges were contributing factors here. I think that's all probably true. Again, I think there's more to it, but and for the sixth consecutive year, suicide is the leading cause of death for young people between the ages of 10 and 29, which is a huge concern. Some positive news, and I think this is really great, that Singapore, just 5 years ago, I think it was in January 2020, actually decriminalized attempted suicide, which is definitely a step in the right direction. It's destigmatizing mental health concerns and not getting away from that language of, and getting away from the language of committing suicide. So I think Singapore is great at working on this. I think that we do have to say that this is definitely a positive step in the right direction, but there's plenty more work that needs to be done. Now, related to statistics, this is something that's very interesting that a lot of people might not know about. There's an effect. It's a fancy way of saying the copycat effect, but it's called the Werther effect. It's named after the book The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe. And what that story is about a young man who suicides and has other people in his life suicide to copy him. And what we find is that the research has shown that media coverage directly impacts suicide rates. So I've heard that there's in Asia a lot of news will underreport because they don't want copycat suicides. When Robin Williams sadly passed away in 2014, the increase in reported suicides between the ages of 30 and 44 went up about 10%, which was a huge, huge number. And it's an interesting balancing act that we have to try to work with because on one hand, you want to be honest about the problem because if you underreport, then immediately you're making this case that, well, maybe the problem isn't so bad. But if you report accurately, then we could have more suicides because of this copycat problem. So this is a problem that I think is an interesting problem, and I'm not actually sure how to move forward. But there's lots of conversation around this. So if the media does underreport, it's because of this Werther effect being a very real problem. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about those at risk, and this will be an opportunity for you to actually add something in the chat. So for people that are at risk, anyone really is at risk of suicide. The number one cause that's related to suicide is mental health concerns. It's accounted for about 50% of all suicide deaths in the United States, especially mental health concerns that people who have bipolar disorder, major depressive disorders, and people who are suffering from chronic pain and physical illness. Anybody who has a previous attempt at suicide or a history of suicide is definitely going to be in a higher risk category. And young people between the ages of 10 and 29, again, are very high at risk, especially in Singapore. Other contributing factors that put people at risk are a recent or upcoming crisis. Intimate partner problems, alcohol use disorder, and substance abuse are also big problems. And especially when we combine alcohol and other drugs with mental health issues. So a lot of people suffering from mental health will self kind of medicate with alcohol, drugs, and this creates a very high risk category of people. So suicide is multifactorial, and it's often not one single incident or one single issue that causes it. It does happen, but often it is with multiple factors that plays a role. Let's talk a little about invitations. And sorry, I kind of lied to you that this is where you're actually going to be able to contribute something in the chat here. So this is really borrowed from safeTALK, and I think it's really great language to use. So when we are talking about invitations, we're talking about what we see, what we hear, what we sense, and what we can learn from people. And what I mean by that is that they call these invitations, right? It's an invitation for you to ask them what's going on, and it's an invitation to invite others to help them in making a choice for life. So that's the language that safeTALK uses, and Living Works uses. They call these invitations, and it's a really great way of thinking about it. So here's a chance for you to type it in the chat. Let's start with the first one, which is what we can see. So we talking about what we see in people that might be at risk for suicide. We see them being careless. They are careless, that they care less about things, and they're also careless in terms of engaging in higher risk behavior. They might be moody, they might withdraw from people, and they might increase their use of alcohol or drugs. So just in the chat, go ahead and type out what else you might see in people that are considering suicide. Detachment, giving away things. That's a really great one. Yeah, absolutely. When we see people start to say, well, I care less about this, and that's under the careless part, they would start to give things away, and that is usually a really good sign. Rumination. Yeah, absolutely, Agnes. Yes, I could be consuming, articles online, changes in behavior, maybe no emotions. Yeah, absolutely. Great. Great. So we're definitely seeing some things here that people understand what these look like. The second one is what we might hear from people that are considering suicide. So we might hear them say things like they're alone, right? Or that they're lonely. We might hear them talking about that they're a burden to their family or a burden to their friends, or they're a burden at work. They might express that they don't have a purpose or that they want a kind of an escape. So these are the things that we would typically hear as invitations by somebody who might be at risk for suicide. Go ahead and type in the chat. What are some of the things you might hear from people who are giving you an invitation that they might be considering suicide? Yeah, nobody can help me. Life is meaningless. Yeah, what's the point? Nobody cares. Yeah, I'm really tired. Yeah, this is the end. Yeah, a feeling of useless. Yeah. Sometimes I want to end it all. I just want to sleep. I don't matter. Absolutely. I'm a burden. Yes, definitely. I want to join my partner in the other world. Absolutely. Let's move on to the next invitation. And these are things that we sense in terms of their feelings. We will sense that there's this feeling of desperation, that they're hopeless, that they might be numb, or they might be ashamed of something. These are feelings that they'll be expressing, that you'll be able to pick it up through and sense. What other feelings do you think, or what other things might you sense about them, other than desperation, hopelessness, numbness, and being ashamed? What other things might you sense from a person who might be considering suicide? Sadness, grief, anger to self. Yeah, feeling worthless, absolutely. Feeling unlovable, angry at the world, guilt, low self-esteem. Yeah, being helpless, uninterested, tired. Yeah, definitely. Good. Loneliness. Yeah, Zari, absolutely. Yeah. If it's something, we'll move on to the next one too, which is what we might learn about a person. So in conversation with them, we might learn this about them. We might learn that they've recently been abused, or that they've dealt with abuse in their past and they're still kind of wrestling with it and struggling with it. We might learn that they've been rejected, either a previous rejection or a new rejection. We might learn that they've gone through a loss or grief. And remember, grief is really love with no place to go. So that response to that love that they've lost could be very, very serious for a lot of people. And previous suicide experience. If they tell you that they have attempted suicide in the past or have some experience with a close member of the family who has suicided, then these are things that we would learn and be concerned about as an invitation as well. What else might we learn about them, do you think? You can type your answers in the chat. Yep. They can't cope with work. Yes, Linda, that's right. Very good. A lot of pain, trauma. Yeah. No one truly loved them. They're tired of living. Yeah. Loss of trust. Yeah. They're having a mental block, no strength to go on. Yeah, absolutely. They're going to be resigned to fate. Sure. Yeah, definitely. Good. Thank you so much for your contributions. Um, let's move into some intervention strategies, and I hope that this gives you a little bit of an idea about what some of the things you can do. I think it's really important to understand that a successful suicide or suicide prevention community is going to be something that happens in layers. And what I mean by this is that at the ground level, there are open conversations about suicide. This is why I think Singapore did such a great thing in decriminalizing attempted suicide, because what it means is that we can talk about it more openly now. And all of you who are here tonight and are taking part in this are part of this ground layer of building capacity. We're talking about suicide. We're talking about it openly. We're not ashamed to talk about it. It's something that's a very real concern, and we want to do something about it. So that being in a community that can talk about it openly, and then leading up to that, we would hope that workplaces, homes, and schools will be places that suicide is actually discussed. Mental health is a concern, and that people are being looked after. I know I'm very grateful at my school. We do workshops for teachers on suicide intervention. We do workshops for students on suicide interventions as well. So having a workplace that embraces this, and a home that you're talking about it with your family, and a school or wherever it would be, any kind of place of learning, very important that this is discussed and talked about and not swept under the carpet and not talked about. Moving up on that capacity kind of layer, we're the basic helping kind of stage, which is the safeTALK. That's the program that I've done and the one that we're going to be talking about a little bit later on. The majority of the materials here are borrowed from the safeTALK program. That's the basic helping level where you are in a position to identify a person who might be giving you invitations and reaching out to them to say, are you considering suicide? If you are, I can give you some help, and I can get you to a helper. And that's the top level, which is the deeper helping. Again, following that living works kind of format where safeTALK is kind of the ground level of helping somebody, moving up to assist training, which is the applied suicide intervention skills training. It's a much more deeper level of support that would involve giving them some kind of measurement and gauging how close and how real is their concern for suicide, developing a safety plan for them, maybe even going into the home and removing things that we know might be something that they would use to assist them in suicide. So this is kind of the layers that we kind of move up. All right. And here's a little insert shameless plug here. I'll talk about this again later. I'm sure Glenn will talk about it as well. We will be offering the safeTALK training coming up in the future, and we'll talk about more about that in a little bit. So it's really important to note here, and I hope you notice that my slides are becoming more and more positive as we're going through the slides. The images, anyway, they're becoming more positive because I do see this as something that there is a lot of hope. The training is really important, but it's not essential to help people. You don't need to have training in order to save someone's life. Being able to recognize invitations and being in a position that you can ask if a person is considering suicide are really the key to being there for somebody. It's important to have a network ready to go, that you know who your assist trained contacts are. I think Glenn is an assist trained helper. I think that Joanne is. I know that I am as well. There are probably many people that you in your community that you might not know who are actually trained. Knowing what your help and crisis lines are, things like how to get in touch with the Samaritans or IMH or the National Care Hotline. Those are really important that you should have. Maybe keep them in like on a piece of paper. I know that with safeTALK, they give you this little card. You write down these numbers so you have them ready to go. And then if you need anything, if you have to actually intervene, then you've got these numbers. I'll just show you. These are a couple that are there. You're welcome to take a picture of this, but most of these are very easy to access. Samaritans of Singapore, IMH, National Care Hotline, Aware, the National Anti-Violence Helpline, the NAVH, and then Touchline as well. These are all people and networks that you can reach out to. If you actually know somebody who is at risk of suicide, you can reach out to them for more support once you've identified that, yes, this is a real risk. We'll go through this kind of quickly, but it'll just give you an idea of what a typical intervention based on the safeTALK and Living Works kind of framework might look like. All right. So the first thing is that a person might be telling you things in conversation. They might say things like, I hate my job. I can't bring myself to go in some days. I'm not sure how I'm going to pay my rent. And I don't feel like talking or seeing anyone right now. And the things that are bolded are things that we would call these are called invitations. I can't bring myself to go to work. Don't know how I'm going to pay my rent. Don't feel like talking. Don't feel like seeing anyone. These are things that people are inviting you to say, do you need some help? And so what's important here is that the person might use these invitations in their question. And I'll give you a better example in a moment. So when someone is, insert invitation here, they are sometimes thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? These 5 little words strung together are the most important part of the intervention. You have to be in a position that you're confident and comfortable to ask someone, are you thinking about suicide? Not, you're not thinking of doing something silly, are you? You're not thinking of hurting yourself, are you? By asking someone if they're thinking about doing something silly, it puts a judgment on their problem. And we don't want to do that. We want to let them know that we are completely sympathetic and empathetic to what they're going through. And we want to know specifically, are you thinking about suicide? Because this is serious. And if you are, we need to get you some support. So it's really important that we get comfortable in that questioning. So what the person who is trained and or maybe even not trained, but is comfortable. So they would say, sometimes when people are missing work, sorry, I can't read that because I think the text is in front of it. When people are missing work, worrying about money and withdrawing from friends and family, this is using the language that they're giving you. So if they're telling you, they're giving you these invitations, you're using these invitations in the question. Sometimes when people are missing work, worrying about money and withdrawing from friends, they're thinking about suicide. Are you thinking about suicide? It's a direct question. And if the person actually responds and says, yes, I am, that's great. Then you're in a position to say, okay, we need extra help. I want to connect you with someone who can keep you safe. Now, you don't have to follow this example exactly. This is just an example of a scenario using the framework of safeTALK, right? Now, it's important that you understand a couple of things here. Now is not the time to solve all of their problems. Now is not the time to say, well, let's see if we can find you another job, or let's see if we can get you money. No, that's not the point. Now is the time to keep them safe and keep them away from doing things that might actually lead them to suicide. So it's doing something that keeps the person with thoughts safe. Keep them safe means that they might have means to harm themselves? Do they have pills in their bag? Do they have access to a weapon at home that might do it? Are they talking about getting onto a roof of their building? Do they have access to a high space? If they have that, we need to know those kind of things. So you would ask about that. And you can't promise them secrecy because if they really resist and they're not they're not keen on working with a helper, then you might have to take some more drastic measures. But because the ultimate goal is to keep them alive. So this is an example of what you might say to a person that's assist trained, maybe somebody from IMH, maybe somebody at NCH, maybe somebody at AWARE, but a person who is in a position to help this person at that next level of support. And you would say something like, this is Mary, she's been missing work, worrying about money, and withdrawing from friends and family. Again, using that invitation examples. So I asked her directly if she's been thinking about suicide, and she said yes. Mary told me there are several big problems going on in her life right now, and she accepts the need to come and see you to get help. Then he would say, Mary, is that more or less where we are? You want to make sure that you're including the person that is considering suicide in this process of getting help. They're not a passive person in this, all right? Make sure that they're involved. Give them some choice on who they might want to connect with. You might say, who do you feel most comfortable talking to? Here are some connections. We can talk to IMH, we can talk to a doctor, we can go into A&E, we can call the police, and they will hopefully be able to give you an indication of who they feel most comfortable getting help. All right? When you are connecting with that safety connection, whoever it is, you mention the invitations, right? And give any details to the connection as well. Do they have a plan? Do they have means? Are they talking about going up onto the roof? You want to make sure that you do give them all as much information that they've shared with you as possible, and you never ever leave them alone. All right? So that sounds like a lot, and I know I kind of rushed through that, but I just wanted to give you an example here of what an intervention might look like. Okay, some final words here just before I go turn it back to Glenn. Helping is a big responsibility, so please take it seriously and be prepared. It's great that you want to help, and I think that all of us are here tonight because we do want to be helpers. We want to be in a better position to assist people that we know who might be considering suicide and actually get them the help that they need. It's number one, though, is that you have to keep yourself safe through any intervention. All right. So that's really important. If you're worried about your safety, if you have to go up on a roof, or if you're somebody you know might have a weapon, then don't go alone and definitely get somebody else that's a professional involved. Do the training. It's actually not that long. The safeTALK training is only 3.5 hours long. And if you're keen on doing assist, it's about 2 days. It's not cheap, but it's definitely worth it. And again, there's no shame in not being ready. It's totally fine. And even people who have done safeTALK and they've done the training with me, they might say afterwards, I still don't feel comfortable asking, and that's totally fine. So then use your resources. If you do suspect somebody, use some of the examples that I've given you. You can call IMH, call the police, get them some help, because as helpers, we do what we can to keep people alive. It's not up to us, and we don't get into an ethical conversation here about letting people do their own thing. Our goal is to keep them alive so they can live and have a chance to sort out whatever issues that they've got and go on to do really great things like we all want with their lives. And with that, I will turn it back to Glenn for some questions.
I thought that was a tight and solid presentation, real practical tools and strategies, even in such a short duration. So, guys, please help me thank Rob. We talk about the safeTALK training, and we're proud to launch this together with Rob. And I want to say right off the bat that it's very limited seats, very, very limited seats. This is a certified suicide alertness training course. 3 hours, guys, because Rob is such an efficient trainer. 3 hours, you'll get certified, you'll get a booklet. These are all official from Living Works. And you've got a promo rate just for this year. The usual rate is $129 per participant. We've only got 2 runs this year, September and October. It's a Saturday run, a weekend, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. The link is being pumped there. Go find out. The QR code is also here.